Welcome to the Billy D's podcast. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you've never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary podcast. With me on the studio line is Josh Lewis. Josh, thank you so much for being here.
Billy, it's good to be with you.
It's a pleasure. And what we're going to talk about today, in a nutshell, is conservatism as in the political sense. Josh has a podcast called Saving Elephants. Now, just very briefly, tell us about that podcast, that show. It's primarily to extol the virtues of being a conservative. Is that correct?
In effect, as the name implies, I'm not referring to actual elephants. I'm referring to the Republican Party. I'm trying to tout the virtues of classical conservatism and hopes to calling the party back to its classical roots. Classical roots.
That's a good place to go. I kind of feel that the term conservative and as far as liberals in the classic sense, by today's standards, has really changed into something that they're not. Kennedy in the classic sense as a progressive, Ronald Reagan in the classic case as a conservative. Neither one of them would qualify for their parties today. That's just the truth. You have to be crazy, I guess, for lack of a better term, to win votes. And that's something that really concerns me. And I'll get into that with you. Let's set the baseline here. What is conservatism in a nutshell? What are the core principles? And you mentioned some of the patron saints of conservatism here, Russell Kirk, William F. Buckley, Frank Meyer, all those people. What's the baseline of principles that you're shooting for with classic conservatism?
That's an excellent question, one that's very difficult to summarize. People far smarter than I have attempted and, in my view, failed to come up with a definition everyone can agree on. But I'm going to pull from a couple of those individuals. Russell Kirk, you remember, says that conservatism begins with a disposition. It's not a political ideology. Now, and others, such as Roger Scruton, have fleshed that out. Abraham Lincoln even said it's the trusting the devil you know to the devil you don't know. Roger Scruton talks about it being this feeling most people have, which is that the good things we're given in life can easily be taken from us. And so we need to preserve them. We need to be careful. We need to conserve them, if you will. That is a sentiment. It's not a political system. It starts with this notion of gratitude. It starts with the notion that things are fragile. It starts with the idea that maybe life doesn't have solutions, but has trade-offs. So maybe we need to be considering all angles and not reduce everything to a political program. From that, of course, you can build a very complex program of, say, free enterprise, of foreign policy, of domestic policy. But it begins with that sentiment. It's not the same as liberalism or socialism or Marxism that has some sort of universal higher principles. It's rather one that says maybe our politics can't be just written down in some book and we completely understand it. Maybe we're kind of searching in the dark for things, and what we ought to do is approach life with humility, with gratitude, with caution. And from that, we can develop a working political solution.
Very good. That's excellent. What I talked about earlier, reaching people. What you just described to me is a very reasonable, I would call it philosophy, not necessarily a political ideology, but it's just a good way to go about life in general. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's not to say you don't take on progressive ideas and things like that. That's all part of how we evaluate things. Sometimes you need change, right? But I do feel that in the last 5 years in particular, like I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you're pretty young compared to me. I can remember, okay, when Ronald Reagan was, he won in the landslide in 1984. I think every state was red except one. And the prevailing wisdom was that you had a conservative ideal, and then you had Tip O'Neill in Congress, and those two guys butted out things. And by contrasting ideas, by working things out, they came up with a better solution than either of them would have had on their own. And really, to an extent, that was still alive in the 1990s with Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich. That there was still people who agreed that up was up, down was down, and they lived in the same universe, playing by the same rules of how things work. Now I feel, and it's in the public, and it's in the politics as well. It's in the politicians. Everybody now not only has a right to their own opinion, but they have a right to their own reality. Mm-hmm. There is no debate now. I've tried, and I'm going to say that the crazy meter, the needle goes in the red more on the left than it does on the right. Now, that's not to say there isn't some far right up people out there.
There are plenty of nuts on both sides.
Yeah, there's plenty of nuts on both sides. Neither one of them have a corner in the market there, but it's impossible to reason with them because you can't even agree on the most basic things. And the founding fathers, you talk about them a lot. A lot of the safeguards that we have, without getting into, I don't want to go on here, but just to set the premise for what I'm about to say. The Electoral College, for example, a lot of people feel that gives small areas, better representation as opposed to a densely populated area. And that is true. That does work that way, but it's really a safeguard. The idea is that the founding fathers knew that the collective wisdom of the country couldn't be trusted, not throughout centuries. Sooner or later, you were going to have a collective wisdom problem. And that's the problem with a pure democracy, quite frankly, is the lines between a democracy and mob rule are very thin. And they always said that the wisdom of the people, an educated populace, and that means people that know what's going on, what's going on. It doesn't necessarily mean school, is the most valuable safeguard to democracy. For the first time in my life, and I was around when everybody was worried about Reagan starting World War III and all that, and I just kind of knew it wasn't going to happen. But for the first time in my life, I kind of feel that the collective wisdom of the country is on shaky ground. How do you feel about that?
I feel like it's difficult to measure. It's hard to know what moment are you in. Now, I think the way you've laid this out, as far as like the ability to work across party lines during the Reagan administration, even during the Clinton administration, obviously something is substantially different today than what it used to be. Thank God most people don't seem to actually believe their own rhetoric. If they did, I think we'd be at a civil war at this point if you follow these ideas in their natural conclusion. So it's almost like there's this anger and vitriol, but it's, I don't want to say limited to, but largely limited to the keyboard, rather than our real day-to-day lives. Although we do see that hatred and violence can spill over. You made an interesting statement there where you talk about shared reality, right? That maybe that's part of the root. And I do think that's part of the root of the problem is, do we have a shared reality? Our founding fathers, in my opinion, were of the belief that what they'd given us is a very difficult project to hold together, the American Republic. It's not impossible. It just requires some work. As you mentioned, an educated public, those who take the time to educate themselves. I would even say if you're going to have a system of self-government, the first requirement is that the self-governs themselves, right? We have to have a group of people out there willing to govern themselves. It's not just education, it's also those small r Republican virtues. I think part of what we are seeing here is the very natural course of human nature. If you give freedom to most people, unfortunately, they don't hold together very well. They tend to fall back on the old rules of tribal politics, of, well, my side needs to get its side or your side needs to get its comeuppance, and this sort of brinksmanship. We're not completely there. We haven't fallen apart, but we're seeing that ugliness emerge more so than maybe we had in the past. And part of that is this notion that we don't share reality. Now, I know that there are various forms, mostly on the left, that actually tout this as a good thing. Moral relativism, the who was it? The speak my truth, as if I get a monopoly on my truth and you have your own truth. Yeah. But to be honest, this is something that I think goes far beyond the left, and it's almost all of us. It's not as common on the right for you to hear people talk about moral relativism or these views, but what you will hear is individuals who say, look, I can't trust your sources of information. I have to trust my sources of information. So what do you do in a world in which part of the country listens to Fox News, the other one MSNBC, part of them are listening to a radical version of the left or the right or some moderated one? What do you do in a world in which we can no longer agree on, it's not that we think reality is up for grabs, it's that we don't trust those sharing, say, reality with us. This is human nature. This is common, and it's something that I think you have to go back to the founding formulas. Unfortunately, as John Adams said, and I'm not going to say it nearly as adequately or eloquently say, that it requires a moral and a just citizenry. That is not something you solve via politics, unfortunately. There is no program, there's no bill we can pass to fix that. That is a problem of the soul. That's a problem of the breakdown of community. There are things that can be done about it. It's not hopeless. But I think it is needful we recognize if we're going to live in a republic, it requires a certain amount of responsibility of us educating ourselves, of us exercising restraint where we need to, of us investing time in what does this great project mean. It's not hopeless. It can be done. But it's and I don't want to stray too far from your question, but I guess that's where my mind goes when you ask. Yeah, things are bad. I do think they're bad. I don't yet know that they're hopeless.
Yeah, I wouldn't say hopeless, but let's just say there's an area of concern on my part.
Sure.
And I was always pretty confident that, through the years, I got to say historically, if you look at what, especially from World War II up to now, this country's been through a lot, but there's always been a sense of stability. There's always been a common sense foundation that everybody kind of sat on. And here again, the bending of reality is what concerns me. I mean, even during our most troubled times during the 1960s, we all agreed that we were in the same universe, playing by the same rules of physics, so to speak. And I'm not sure that's the case anymore. And a good case in point is this. Charlie Kirk, that horrible assassination. And I'm not particularly a religious person. I didn't follow him that closely. I would monitor him when a big news event broke and he would be giving his opinion or something. I kind of follow like Matt Taibbi, people like that. I don't really, Charlie Kirk, quite frankly, came with a lot of preaching that I just didn't resonate with me. However, I was shocked.
You're also, as we might have established earlier, in the wrong age bracket to be following Charlie Kirk.
Well, it depends. It depends.
Sure, he had his older crowd, but I'm saying he was a predominant. It had a seismic impact on young Americans.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of that was because, quite frankly, a lot of college students these days, and I work with a lot of them, simply are not exposed to those ideas. Mm-hmm. Okay, and because the college campuses have become, I don't want to say censored, but they've been controlled environments. They've become controlled environments. And there's one point of view that generally prevails. And it wasn't like that when I went to school. It wasn't like that. But getting back to what happened with Charlie Kirk, I think the assassination shocked me. It saddened me. That one hit me. And I've heard a lot of people say that for whatever reason, that one really bothered me. But there was more than a few. I've heard people dismiss this as saying, well, it wasn't as many as you think. There were a lot of people who celebrated online. And very publicly too. A lot of them were out in public areas. A lot of the vigils that were held for Charlie Kirk were disturbed. Here again, I'm of a certain age. I remember when Reagan was shot, and when I went to high school, I didn't really hear any horribly disparaging comments like "I'm glad it happened" or anything like. I really didn't hear it. I was way too small for Martin Luther King. I was probably just a couple of years old. I'm sure that it happened, and it probably happened in quiet bars behind the closed doors where people said, yeah, great. But it wasn't so public. Same with JFK. I'm sure he had his detractors. I'm sure a lot of people really didn't cry for him. But the shameless public display, I did a reel of it on my last podcast, where one guy was actually talking to the family and said, hey, how was it watching him with his blood squirting out? And he had this real maniacal laugh. I'm going to say thousands, certainly. Thousands upon thousands of these. And I would venture to say that if 9/11 happened today, there would probably be people celebrating it or saying we deserved it or whatever, to some degree. That kind of disregard for human life, the idea that someone who speaks against your beliefs should be celebrated when they pass. This is new. I know people say, well, people always did that before. They just didn't have social media. No, they didn't. I was around. Here again, in high school, I didn't hear that when Reagan got shot. It just didn't. I'm here again. I'm sure there was somebody somewhere, but there weren't people in while we were in gym class laughing about it or saying, I'm glad it happened. It just didn't happen. What's your take from a conservative standpoint? I'm sure social media is a factor. Breakdown of the family is a factor. But I don't know that explains the bloodlust that I was seeing. It was a bloodlust is the best way I can describe it. Does that disturb you at all? Do you have an opinion about it?
Yeah, I would hope it would disturb us all. Obviously, it doesn't disturb everyone because some people are celebrating it. Look, let me just lay my cards on the table and say up front, I was not a fan of Charlie Kirk. That is not the same as saying I celebrate in any way the fact he was shot. And a lot of people have pointed out some things I think is entirely true, which was good on Charlie Kirk for consistently standing up and trying to have arguments with people. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's a wonderful thing to do. Now, when I say I wasn't a fan of his, he did so in a way that, in my view, was less about trying to win converts or at least speak directly to those individuals and tended to antagonize more. And it was good for getting clickbaits on YouTube, and he did very well. And you are correct. I think in so doing, I think he did help a certain amount of young Americans who felt alienated from the predominant, say, liberal culture feel like, well, hey, here's somebody standing up for me. So that's not of no value. I don't mean to imply that at all. I guess I simply mean I would prefer he had found a different method, or that we lived in a world in which someone doing that would not have to be so successful because, there weren't that many on the right ostracized. But all that being said, yes, from top to bottom, everything about this was disturbing. Doesn't begin to cover it. I mean, he was murdered. Not that this makes it okay, but we're used to seeing these happen with politicians or with individuals who the murderer themselves are just mentally deranged. And maybe Charlie's murderer was in a certain sense. This is the closest, though, in my opinion, we've seen an actual politically motivated murder. That this individual does not seem to have had have fallen down some vast radicalized hole, but just as he said himself, he couldn't stand the hate anymore. And in terms of the person that murdered Charlie Kirk is one person.
Right.
What you're asking about, which is something I'm far more concerned about, is how many out there who would never pull the trigger have in their heart, this was a good thing. I celebrate this. Even if they don't say it, how many people are like, yeah, but I'm glad he's dead. And one thing and I know where people are coming from when they say this, but I feel like I need to push back. It is good to point out that Charlie Kirk left behind a wife and kids, but I desire to live in a world that even if Charlie Kirk was an orphan, had no wife, had no kids, we would still say, what a horrible thing that someone was murdered publicly just for voicing his opinion, even if I didn't happen to agree with it. And I think Kirk has become an avatar for sort of this moment that we're in which everything gets reduced to red versus blue, left versus right. And we hear this. Look, I'm by no, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to equate what happened to Kirk to other rhetoric we hear from some other people. But just to give you an example, Donald Trump himself, when running for office, made comments to the effect of, look, they're coming after me via lawfare because I'm standing in the way. If they weren't coming after me, they would come after you. Well, that may be true in some sort of a sense, but I don't think most of the left has in their heart we need to just lock up everyone on the right. There is a difference of kind between Trump. We hear this same rhetoric from the left that it says Charlie Kirk became an avatar of someone who is racist. That's the excuse, right? Because he held racist beliefs in his heart, which incidentally I don't think is true. We could talk about that for an hour, but let's just assume it was true. Let's assume the guy was a complete racist, that somehow his existence, that eliminating Charlie Kirk is in some way making this world a better place. I do hope that some of this is the stupidity of social media. I'm looking at you as you're a screen to me. There's something about the human brain that makes me forget occasionally, wait, Billy Deese is a human. You're not just some picture on a screen. There's something I do hope that part of this is a matter of people just have lost their ability to adapt to the humanity of the situation just because we're screens. But I agree with you, even if you take that away, there's just something fundamentally wrong with a culture that has I will call it a sizable minority that vocally celebrates this sort of thing. Every time there's been a tragedy, some idiot has celebrated it. But this just seems so... we've crossed a line somehow. And granted, most elected Democrats have rightly condemned it. Maybe they'll do so in words that I don't particularly appreciate, but you don't have too many true thought leaders. But you have some sort of critical mass that it looks like we're moving in a direction that I don't like. It looks like, we keep talking about this, how many more school shootings, how much more of this can we tolerate? And some other threshold we could across is that we may be moving into a world where we're just having to tolerate the fact that a sizable number of Americans celebrate when, air quotes, the other side is mercilessly murdered.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Here again, that was what shocked me. The assassination was bad enough, but to me, sizable negative, and not just negative, but I mean celebratory bloodlust was pretty earth-shaking for me. Okay, we talk about the founding fathers and Ronald Reagan, William F. Buckley. These are the pillars of conservatism. Today, I'm going to say, let's say with the Democrats, one of my biggest episodes last year from a marketing standpoint, I laid out why the Democrats were destined to lose. That's the one that Keith Olbermann blocked me on. That one got some national attention, and I drew the ire of some well-known figures, and he was one. Okay. I wasn't being mean. They didn't have a candidate, and they didn't have a message. And that's still the case with the Democrats right now. Right now, the Republicans, obviously Trump has a personality for sure. There's the MAGA message. I don't know that a lot of the things that are going on are necessarily conservative. For example, sending troops into states, my opinion. I can understand sending troops into Washington, D.C. That's not a state. If you're a true conservative, I'm going to say states' rights are pretty important to you. I don't know that sending the troops in when they're not wanted to a state is a conservative ideal. That's my opinion. Mm-hmm. Are there conservative figures out there that you would look to as the modern pillars of conservatism?
There's not a lot in elected office, and that's very discouraging. We live in a time that, for reasons that we could spend a long time talking about, so I won't dive into that right now, our system does not seem to reward, and I don't want to say conservative, I'm going to call it prudential leadership. Those who approach it as, or rather, it seems to award those who vest more money in their comms team and owning the other side rather than actually trying to resolve real issues. Mm-hmm. Those people do exist, though. And one of the things I love about my podcast, and that does continue to give me hope, is I have had the great joy and pleasure of having my heroes on here. Yuval Levin, who I personally consider to be the greatest conservative intellectual alive today, unless maybe we could count Thomas Sowell. He's in his 90s, but mm-hmm. He's still trucking. Jonah Goldberg, who's a great communicator, Mitch Daniels, former governor of Indiana, who I wished had been president. We would be on a better course. These are incredible individuals. I've also had on here people that if I cited their names, I guarantee you would have never heard of them. Mm-hmm. They're nobody special, but right. They are some of the most erudite and brilliant and thoughtful and caring people you have ever met. And they're out there. And so I think while I do think it's important to answer your question, I also think it's important I set that base that, look,
sure,
this country is not short on individuals who are behaving themselves in an appropriate manner. Just the system isn't such that we're rising to the fore. But yeah, I think I like former Senator Ben Sasse. I like Mitch Daniels, neither of which seem to be viable candidates at the moment. There's a long list of people I could tolerate, say that I would say I think they would make a decent leader, even though I have some things against them. But to me, those are sort of it's unfortunate, those are sort of the leaders of yesterday, if you will, that are still there, but not really at the fore within the Republican Party and the conservative movement.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you kind of had an echo of what Nixon referred to as the silent majority.
Yeah.
I know you have a lot of faith in the people that aren't seen. The people that aren't protesting or raising a ruckus or saying all kinds of crazy things online. How confident are you in that there's a good baseline of people that have common sense, that have basic values? And we're not talking about real crazy, high moralistic people, just people
Sure.
that have common sense, appreciate the dignity and safety and respect other people, those kind of things. Are you pretty confident that there's a lot of people out there that we're still the silent majority?
I think that's a fair way to summarize it. I mean, again, this is one of those, you're asking me really good questions that I don't know that I have like a 80% confidence rate in, if you will. I think, well, I'll put it this way. I think there is the potential for latent moral civic behavior within the American people. Always has been. I think we have always shown the capacity to rise up to the occasion. Now, maybe someday we won't, God forbid. But who knew that the generations that went through World War II or the Great Depression or the First World War or the Civil War were capable of doing what they did? They probably didn't know they were capable of that until put to the test. And so I don't want to discount the American people in a sense that a nation state such as ours has been gifted with this much liberty and has shown this much capacity to do so many creative good things with it is capable. I think it takes a Reagan type figure sometimes to call us out as the city on a hill who to unleash the ingenuity to give us almost permission to rise to our better angels. Calvin Coolidge, maybe a greater conservative president, lived in an age of excess and was consistently calling Americans to rise above, to embrace their better angels, if you will. I do think that, and direct answer to your question, yes, those people are out there, but my greater hope is not so much in there are a certain percentage of the population, but rather we have the capacity as free individuals to behave seemly. We ought to be challenged to do so because that is a better way to live.
Yes. I'll ask you just one more, maybe. I know there's no right or wrong answer. This is just probing for perspective. There's no way to test for this. In the past, years ago, I was a lot more critical of the religious right than I am now. And, the idea of imposing morals on voting. I was always very weary of politicians who stood up and said after they won an election that God has just spoken. That's getting into territory there where, insinuating that there was divine providence in an election is kind of why the founding fathers said, don't do that. But I got to tell you, I've softened my tone a little bit on it. And I'll tell you why. With the anti-religious sentiment that has been prevalent, for example, you can talk about any number of sexual proclivities in a schoolroom, but you don't dare mention Jesus as even a historical figure. And here again, I'm not a religious person. That's not where I'm going at with this. But I actually went to Catholic school, grade school. I went to public school for high school. And that was back in the 1970s. And there were parishes, there was like the, St. Joseph's and all those kind of things were, the Italian parish. And then there was the Polish and the Slovakian one. And then there was, the Cubans and so on and so forth.
Right.
And when somebody died or there was a death in the family or a tragedy, everybody pulled together. They brought food over and there was this and that. And with the disappearance of that, with the disappearance of the churches, with the disappearance of those values, I'm starting to notice now that it hasn't been replaced with anything. We are, in a lot of ways, morally devoid. The celebrations of the online assassination is an example, but that's most of the things that come to mind for me are more subtle than that. There is no clear right or wrong anymore. It really depends on what the circumstances were, what happened to them during their childhood. There's all kinds of excuses about how society may have influenced this person. There's never, I never hear a Democrat say criminals are bad. They cannot say it. It's impossible. Okay. From I know you're a younger person than I, you probably didn't see this evolve. But we're in a situation now where people have a hard time determining what right and wrong is without a bunch of other factors thrown in. It's who done what to whom. For me, a given action is either right or wrong. It doesn't matter who the participants are, who the perpetrator is, who the victim is. The action is either right or wrong. From a conservative standpoint, which does rely a certain amount on faith, that's not necessarily a rule to be a conservative that you have to be religious, but I think there is a principled set of values that are very traditional in conservatism. Those values have eroded. Family structure, so on and so forth. Is there a way that politically you can even correct that? I don't know that you can.
I don't know. My suspicion, because I'm not a hard-nosed, say, libertarian in some of these respects. I think that certain policies can be done to where at the margin will in fact have some sort of a positive benefit on our moral fiber, say.
Yeah.
I just think that it would be nuts to suggest that's the solution for getting us out of this mess. So sure, let's have those conversations at the margin. But I think we need to recognize, if we're talking about moral rot, that's not a policy issue. That's not a that's not something that we can devise a. And the reason I say it's not a policy issue, it's not a collectivist problem. It's an individual problem. We have to minister to the individual human. For the sake of putting my cards on the table, I am religious. I am a Christian. I too, incidentally, fear, as you sort of opened up there, saying those who pronounce some sort of divine message from God as not only being not necessarily trustworthy, but certainly no one I want anywhere near the an elected office. Maybe some of them could do some good. I don't know, but I would say, and I think sometimes the way we get tangled up here is I am a social conservative too, which means I very much think it's necessary for there to be a cohesive social structure within society. I'm just a little wary that the government can get us there. And so things, as you had mentioned, the church, yes, is necessary. It's conceivably possible that something other than just religion can knit communities together. But my take is, if we're going to hold together as a free people, let's throw everything we can at the wall. Let's throw, we need our religion. We need, as Robert Putnam put it, this isn't his direct quote, but we need bowling leagues. We need people to be parts of communities and institutions and groups that give them not only a sense of value and purpose, but also a sense of responsibilities, and that they have others looking up to them and people expecting things of them. Certainly religion does a good job of that. As you mentioned, your community, it has a sense of let's come together. Here's part of the problem here is we human beings can only have so many true friends.
Yeah.
I don't know you personally, but maybe we could find something we connect on. Some ideology, some religion, some philosophy, some certain way of looking at the world. Well, now I'm connected to you. Now I can feel some sort of a positivity to you that maybe I couldn't have earlier. And the more of those things we have, the more we can behave with virtue. I don't, again, to be clear, speaking as a Christian, I don't think that the Christian, there's a certain level of, say, Christian nationalism that I detest these days because I don't think it is Christian or American.
Right.
But I understand where they're coming from. I get the idea that you look around you and see, hey, the world's falling apart. People are celebrating Charlie Kirk got shot in the neck. Maybe we need a more strong hand of the state to put things back together. And I just doubt that the state itself could do that, even though I'm open to, again, on the margins, maybe we could make some progress.
Sure. I'll wrap things up with this. You're a young guy, extremely intelligent. I'm not trying to, compliment you. Very well spoken. I don't doubt you have a bright future ahead of you. What would be your message of hope for the future moving forward? Not only to young people, but to people in general. I know a lot of people are really scared about the future. They're worried about war. They're worried about the unspeakable acts of violence, which seem to happen almost every day now. I can remember back in the 1980s again. There was a horrible shooting at a McDonald's in the 1980s, and that shocked the nation. Some guy came, and there was one photograph in particular of a child draped over a bicycle that was just absolutely shocking at the time. Now it seems it's a daily occurrence. And I've had people tell me, well, that always happened. We just didn't know about it. No, it didn't. I was around back then. We didn't have to have security guards at the door of every school. We didn't have that. It just, I'm sure there was violence, but nothing like it is today. Do you have a hopeful outlook for the future in our society?
I do. And I think, and hope is not, in my view, optimism necessarily. I don't believe as a matter of faith things are going to get better. I just hope that they do. And I think it's entirely possible. And I think we have a sense of agency in that. We have something we can contribute to that great project. I also think, and again, here speaking as a Christian, that within God's providence, even if we live through one of those very difficult times, there is still purpose and meaning, and we can hope for a brighter future. And even if we aren't here alive to see it, But I think all of reality is so difficult to fit into your head. I agree with everything you just said about the rise of violence. There is a certain hopelessness, a certain malaise, understandably, that is coming to the nation. That being said, there's also other ways of looking at things, to where if we could somehow, resurrect from the grave our ancestors from hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, I suspect there are certain ways in which they would look around and say, why would you not be hopeful? Just bear in mind certain things, such as we have come closer to eliminating poverty on this planet than any other time in the entire human race. The degree of material gain, the ability to reduce disease, to spread, the ability, freedom has spread to a larger degree than any other time in human race. Now, I know it's dipped, waxed, and waned. I'm not saying things are perfect. I'm certainly not saying they look like they're heading in a good direction. But we have, in a sense, hit the pinnacle of human experience in terms of, again, speaking as a species, as human beings, material wealth, of reducing poverty, of reducing infant mortality, of disease. My God, what wonderful things to hope for. Look what life we have. What era would we have preferred to have been born into? Hundreds of years where if you got a cut, you could be dead within a week. Yeah. And so I think there is a need for that sort of perspective, that yes, there are bad things, and there is reason to there's reason to believe things can get worse. But on a whole, we have been given such a wonderful opportunity that most humans never have. And for that reason alone, I think we are obliged to be hopeful.
Yes. Are you, as a Christian and a conservative, here again, personal opinion, no right or wrong answer, is AI going to help us or hurt us?
Yes.
I got to throw a zinger in there.
No, well, I think the answer to that question is yes. And I think that AI we don't really know how seismic this is going to be. I mean, it's obviously going to be seismic. We just don't know to what degree. I suspect it's going to be the same as almost any other invention, which is that we're going to radically overpredict the ways in which it's going to change everything, and then completely miss the ways in which it does, in fact, change everything. And you asked, as a Christian and conservative, I love that you phrased it that way. It was C.S. Lewis in his book, The Abolition of Man, that points out that the bottom line is we're still stuck in human nature. Every invention we ever come up with is some attempt to exert power over nature. We can't fly, so let's build an airplane, right? We have kids when we have sex, so let's invent contraceptions to kind of control it. We're always trying to control nature, but we are part of nature. I have a human nature. I have base desires that are not good for me and not good for you, that I'm always warring against. And no matter how clever we get with our inventions, it doesn't change that basic fact. So everything is going to be at some simultaneous level good and bad for us.
Yes, I'm with you on that. I think that's a great point. I know a lot of the science fiction stories where a computer is going to take over the earth. I'm going to say that that's pretty far reaching. I don't believe that's going to happen. However, not impossible, but I don't believe it's going to happen. I think it's going to be more subtle, and it's already started. Something as simple as asking Chat GPT to help you edit a letter or something like that is fine, but it's growing, and people are asking it about health problems. They're asking it about relationship problems. They're asking it about things like this, and getting back to the absence of faith. People are relying on artificial means, and I think their behavior is going to be guided by artificial intelligence, and consequently their behavior is going to become artificial. And that's something that it doesn't happen in one day. That this is like the old analogy of sitting in hot water. You don't realize it's getting hot. And I think it's going to come to a boil in a couple of years, and we're already going to be sitting in it. That is my fear. It's going to be just subtle adaptation of technology to make your decisions in your life.
I think speaking as both a Christian and conservative, well, I guess say in this sense as a conservative, that is the value I think conservatism really brings to us. It is in a sense a continuous project to try to find the eternal in a sea of change. And what a world of change we live in. And change is good. Change is innovative. Change brings all kinds of prosperity. But coupled with change, we've got to find a way to say, but what is eternal? And if you can do those two things, I think come what may, when something like AI comes up, it will end up being more a benefit than a detriment.
Yeah. Well, let's hope. That's a good note to end on. We're talking to Josh Lewis. The podcast he has is called Saving Elephants, a reference to the Republican Party. Where can people find your podcast, and where can they find you online?
If you look in a podcast platform, you could probably find me just with Saving Elephants. If you Google me, there's too many people trying to save elephants. So you're going to have to, the website is savingelephants.blog.com. Or if you Google Saving Elephants Josh Lewis or Saving Elephants Conservatism, you could probably find me.
Awesome. That is fantastic. Josh, absolute pleasure talking to you. You're a joy. I could listen to you for a long time. I can understand why you're a podcaster, because you're just a fantastic speaker. It's been a joy to listen to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Billy, pleasure's all mine.
Okay. I'm Billy D's. Podcast has been around over 10 years now in its current form. Real easy to find the Billy D's podcast. You can find us on any major podcast platform. We are on all of them. As far as social media goes, kind of my social media home is still X, which is the old Twitter. There's the trending aspect, the real-time aspect of it is just something that goes together with podcasting hand in hand. You can always find me there, and there's links in the bio if you want to find me elsewhere, Facebook, what have you. But, X is kind of like my social media home. Thank you very much for listening to our program today. As always, you listening is so important to us and so appreciated. Thank you so much. And we will talk to you again very, very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Billy D's podcast. Follow Billy D's on X @BillyD's for updates about the program.
Do you listen to music or audiobooks on streaming devices such as Sonos or Amazon speakers? How about on your car sound system? If you use Spotify, Audible, or Amazon Music on any of these systems, you can also listen to the Billy D's podcast the same way. Billy and his team go the extra mile to make sure our podcasts sound as good or better than anything on the radio. Listening to the Billy D's podcast has never been easier. You literally just have to ask.